She was trying to get closer. That was all she was doing. She was not asking for anything unreasonable. She was not being needy or demanding or too much. She was simply trying to close the distance between you. And something in you, something you did not choose and could not fully explain, moved in the opposite direction. You got quieter. You got busier. You found reasons to be somewhere else. And she felt it. And she tried harder. And the harder she tried, the further you went, until she stopped trying. And then, and this is the part that is the hardest to look at, you missed her. You felt the loss of her trying. You wanted her back. You moved toward her again. And when she responded, when she came back, when the distance closed, the same thing happened again. And you have been running this cycle in some version for most of your adult life. You are not a bad person. You are not a commitment phobe in the simple way that word gets used. You are not someone who does not want love. You want it deeply, probably more than you have ever admitted to anyone. But there is something that happens when love gets close enough to be real. When it stops being a possibility and becomes a presence. When someone actually sees you, not the version you present, but something underneath it. And something in you reads that closeness not as safety, but as threat. This is the psychology of men who push away the people who love them most, and it is one of the most common and most destructive patterns in men's emotional lives. Not because these men are broken, because they were taught early and thoroughly that closeness was dangerous, that being known was a risk, that the only safe position in a relationship was slightly out of reach. And that lesson has been running ever since in every relationship that mattered, costing them the exact thing they wanted most. There is a term in psychology called avoidant attachment. It describes a relational pattern in which closeness triggers anxiety rather than comfort, where the natural human need for connection coexists with a deep, often unconscious fear of what connection makes possible. Being hurt, being abandoned, being seen fully and found insufficient. And rather than sitting with that fear, the avoidant person creates distance, not consciously, not cruelly, as a reflexive, automatic response to the approach of genuine intimacy. This pattern is significantly more common in men than in women, not because men are emotionally inferior or incapable of connection, because the way most men are raised actively creates the conditions for avoidant attachment to develop and then socializes men not to examine it. Boys are taught very early that emotional dependency is weakness, that needing people is something to be managed and minimized, that the appropriate response to emotional discomfort is to deal with it alone, internally, without burdening anyone or revealing that the discomfort exists. And then those boys become men who have mastered the external performance of independence while carrying, underneath it, the same human need for connection that every person carries, unaddressed, unnamed, running the relationship patterns of a child who learned that closeness cost more than it gave. The push and pull is not random. It has a very specific rhythm. When someone is distant, when they are unavailable, when they do not fully commit, when the relationship exists as a possibility rather than a certainty, the avoidant man can engage warmly, can be present, even tender, can move toward the connection without the threat response activating because the connection is not yet close enough to be threatening. But as the distance closes, as the person becomes more available, more present, more genuinely invested, the activation begins. The anxiety rises, the need for space becomes urgent, and the withdrawal happens. Not because he stopped caring, because caring became real enough to be dangerous.
The cruelest part of this pattern is its timing. The withdrawal comes precisely when the other person has become most vulnerable, when they have invested the most, when the relationship has become real enough to matter, which means the person who loves him experiences his withdrawal not as a psychological pattern, but as a personal verdict, as evidence that when they became fully themselves in the relationship, when they stopped holding back, what they revealed was not enough. The wound his pattern creates in others is a mirror of the wound that created the pattern in him. It almost always starts before you can remember it starting. The avoidant attachment pattern in men is typically formed in the first few years of life, in the specific dynamics of the earliest relationships. A primary caregiver, usually a parent, who was emotionally unavailable, not absent necessarily, present in the room, but not present in the way that a child needs, not attuned, not responsive to emotional signals, in a way that taught the child that expressing need leads to need being met. What the child learns in that environment is not that love does not exist. It learns something more specific and more damaging. It learns that expressing need, showing vulnerability, reaching for closeness, creates an uncomfortable situation that is not resolved by the caregiver's response. And so the child adapts. It suppresses the reaching. It learns to self-soothe rather than seek comfort. It becomes, in the language of developmental psychology, compulsively self-reliant. And the adults around it praise this. They call it independence. They call it maturity. They say, "What a strong boy." And the child learns that the suppression of need is not just a survival strategy, but a virtue. Then the boy grows up, and he enters relationships, and the person he is with is not unavailable. They are warm and present and genuinely trying to get close, and his nervous system, which was calibrated to unavailability, does not know what to do with this. The availability does not feel like safety. It feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar to a nervous system that learned its template in a specific kind of early environment registers as unsafe, and unsafe triggers the only response available: distance, control, the re-establishment of the familiar dynamic where he is the one who needs less, who depends less, who can walk away if he has to. Sometimes it comes from a different source, a relationship, a parent, a first love, a close friendship, where he was fully open and was hurt, where the vulnerability he risked was met with betrayal or abandonment, or the kind of emotional response that confirmed the original lesson, that closeness leads to pain, that being known leads to being left. And the walls went up, reasonable walls, earned walls, walls that made complete sense given what had just happened, and the walls stayed, long after the person who occasioned them was gone, long into every subsequent relationship, running the old protection in the new context, because protection does not know when it is no longer necessary.
The first cost is the relationships themselves. The people who loved you most, the ones who saw something real in you and moved toward it, those are the people this pattern damages most completely. Because the people who are easy to be with, who do not try to get close, who maintain comfortable surface-level connection, those people do not trigger the response. You can be warm and present with people who do not threaten intimacy. It is specifically the people who love you deeply who activate the withdrawal, which means the pattern selects against exactly the relationships that could give you what you most need. The second cost is the version of yourself you never develop. Emotional intimacy, real intimacy, the kind that requires sustained vulnerability and genuine mutual knowledge, is not just a relationship benefit, it is a developmental process. The man who avoids it does not just miss connection, he misses the growth that only happens inside genuine connection. The self-knowledge that only becomes available when another person reflects you back. The emotional range that only expands when you practice the full range with someone who is safe enough to practice with. The man who stays at the surface of his relationships stays, in some important emotional sense, at the developmental stage where the avoidance began. The third cost is the loneliness, and this one is the most important to name because it is the most denied. The avoidant man is often deeply lonely, not always, obviously. He may have a full life, many connections, a social world that looks complete from the outside,
But underneath the independence, underneath the self-sufficiency, underneath the practiced ease of a man who has learned to need nothing, there is a hunger for the kind of closeness he keeps preventing, for being truly known by someone, for the specific relief of not having to manage his presentation. That hunger does not go away by staying busy or staying independent or staying just slightly out of reach. It accumulates quietly over years into the specific grief of a man who spent his life proving he did not need anyone and ended up alone in the way that matters most.
Think about the last person who genuinely loved you. Not a casual connection. Someone who was fully present, who tried to get close, who showed you with their actions that you mattered to them. What did you do with that? Did you move toward it? Or did you find reasons, subtle, reasonable sounding, entirely convincing reasons to create distance, to slow things down, to introduce doubt, to make yourself slightly less available just as they made themselves fully available? Think about the relationships that ended, the pattern in how they ended, whether the other person always seemed to want more than you were giving, whether you were frequently described as closed off, hard to read, emotionally unavailable, whether you found yourself genuinely confused by these descriptions because from inside your experience you were doing your best, and the confusion itself is part of what makes this pattern so hard to see. Because the withdrawal feels like self-protection, the distance feels like reasonableness, the avoidance feels like maturity, and by the time the relationship ends, you have a dozen convincing explanations for why it wasn't right, none of which account for the possibility that it was right and you made it wrong. And ask yourself the honest question, not the question you would answer out loud, the one underneath it. Are you lonely? Not situationally lonely, not missing a specific person, structurally lonely. Lonely in the way that has been constant across different relationships, different phases of life, different attempts at connection. Lonely in the way that suggests the problem is not the people you have been with. The problem is what happens to you when people get close. The framing you were given that needing people is weakness, that independence is strength, that a man who requires nothing from anyone is a man to be admired is one of the most expensive lies ever sold to men. It is expensive because it takes something real, the capacity for self-reliance, for resilience, for not collapsing when things are hard, and extends it into territory where it actively destroys the thing it claims to protect, a man's life. Real strength in this context looks like the opposite of what you were taught. It looks like tolerating the anxiety of closeness without acting on it, sitting with the discomfort of being fully known and not creating distance to manage it, letting someone love you without engineering the dynamic back toward the familiar pattern of unavailability, saying, I notice I want to pull back right now, and I am choosing not to. That is harder than anything the independence model asks of you. That requires more genuine courage than the performance of needing nothing ever did. It also looks like understanding the pattern clearly enough to name it when it is running, not to a therapist necessarily, though that helps, to yourself in the moment. When the withdrawal impulse rises and you recognize it for what it is, not a reasonable assessment that this relationship is wrong, but a nervous system doing what it learned to do when something real got close. That recognition does not automatically change the behavior, but it creates a gap between the impulse and the action. And in that gap, for the first time, there is a choice. The men who do this work, who face this pattern honestly, who name it, who tolerate the discomfort of staying present when every learned reflex says withdraw, those men build something most men never build,
relationships that are actually as deep as they are long, partnerships with people who genuinely know them, a life that is full in the way that matters, not impressive from the outside, full from the inside. That is the version of strength that is actually worth having, and it is available, but it requires walking directly into the thing you have been successfully avoiding your whole life, which is the only direction that has ever led anywhere real. Next episode, why men chase the women who don't want them and pull back from the women who do. The specific psychology of why unavailability feels like attraction and availability feels like something is wrong, what your nervous system is actually responding to, and how to rewire it. That one is next.